Thank you, Mr. President. It's not often that I agree with the senator from California, but I certainly appreciate her perspective on this issue. A number of us from a broad spectrum within both parties are concerned about this nomination, and I do rise to oppose the nomination of Ben Bernanke as Federal Reserve Chairman. I think it's important that we look at this not just as a single nomination, but as part of a much bigger picture that we need to recognize. Because the confirmation of Ben Bernanke is a confirmation of the policies that brought our economy down. If we ignore that, we are going to continue these same policies and condemn ourselves, our country, our fellow Americans to high unemployment and much less prosperity in the future. It's never fair to blame any one person for major problems like we have in this country. But it's really important when we have this kind of problem, where millions of Americans have lost in total trillions of dollars, and jobs have been lost, families have suffered greatly, that we recognize the difference between the problems that we're looking at today and the real causes of those problems. What we call in business the root causes of problems. And we learned when we did strategic planning, and I did this for years for companies, if you go in and look at the problems and try to solve them and never go back and understand the root causes of those problems, then all you're doing is fixing symptoms which never get fixed because you didn't understand the causes of those problems. Today in this country, we do have a difficult economic situation with high unemployment. We've got debt at levels that everyone agrees is unsustainable. Countries all over the world are beginning to question whether or not we can repay our debts. And some are beginning to question whether they should lend us any more money to fund our reckless spending. Because despite what we heard last night about a freeze on spending, everyone in the chamber laughed when we said that starts next year. Today we vote to extend the debt limit another $1.3 trillion. We're going to take that debt to over $14 trillion. And there is no foreseeable way that we can pay that back. This is at a time when a large group of Americans called the baby boomers are going to retire, and the cost of Social Security and Medicare is going to skyrocket. These are promises we have to keep to seniors because they've paid for it, but we have no idea of how we're going to keep those promises to seniors right now, particularly in light of the current economic situation. As we look at where we are, we need to recognize how we got there. And as I've talked to banks, businesses, foreign financial ministers from Europe who've come here, everyone agrees that there are two major causes of the economic problems here and around the world. And one is the high leverage or the high borrowing that went on because of the loose monetary policy at the Federal Reserve. Easy money, cheap money. Encouraged companies and individuals to borrow more than they could afford to pay back because it was easy to get and cheap. The big banks on Wall Street could more easily borrow money than to raise capital. Those were incentives created by the policies at the Federal Reserve. The second problem is what we're calling toxic assets, which are securitized subprime mortgages that was facilitated by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, two government-sponsored enterprises that reflected the political policy of this Congress. It's our responsibility to oversee Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and to make sure that they were doing what was appropriate for our economy. But what happened is the criteria for lending went away. Local mortgage companies could make almost any loan they wanted to anyone, whether they could afford to pay it back, using easy money from the Federal Reserve and low criteria for giving these loans, and they sold them all to Fannie Mae. If Fannie Mae had not been there to buy these loans, these irresponsible loans would not have been made in the first place. But to make matters worse, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac bundled these subprime mortgages up into packages we call securities and sold them. Sold them to banks as assets. Sold them all over the world. These are the toxic assets that brought down our financial institutions once the housing bubble burst. So folks, for the President, for Ben Bernanke, for Secretary Geithner to come in and indict the free market system and greed of corporations and banks misses the whole point of what caused this problem. Certainly these two causes created perverse incentives for the markets, the banks, to practice irresponsible behavior. There's no question that went on. But to say that that was the cause of where we are today misses the whole point. My problem with Ben Bernanke and the President and Geithner, or Secretary Geithner, excuse me, is not that they made mistakes, because Congress certainly made mistakes in not overseeing Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and asking the right questions to the Federal Reserve. But the fact that despite the evidence is so clear of what really caused our problem, Mr. Bernanke still does not recognize those as the causes of our problem. In fact, he continues the same easy money policy. He expresses no sense of urgency that we need to get the federal government out of owning AIG, Fannie Mae, General Motors, or Chrysler. When we bring him in for hearings, he seems to be more of a command and control person than someone who believes in a free market system that we need to have good laws and regulations to guide. But he and Secretary Geithner and the President indicate that they can run this economy, that they can micromanage it. But folks, to confirm Ben Bernanke is to confirm the continuation of easy money policies, high leverage, as well as a continuation of what Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac did to create these toxic assets. We're not asking the right questions. And I contend that we cannot solve today's problems with the same people who created them. President Obama, again last night, liked to blame George Bush for the problems, yet he's nominating his people. Secretary Geithner was involved with the Federal Reserve and was an architect of these bailouts. Ben Bernanke has been here for 4 years, and it was a key part of the bailouts, the easy money policy, and is yet to say that that was a problem. My colleagues and fellow Americans, this is more than just another nomination. Everything we work for in a material sense rests on the value of our dollar and our monetary system. The American economy, the worldwide economy, rest on what the Federal Reserve does. This is the Federal Reserve that told us the subprime mortgage would not cause an economic breakdown. Ben Bernanke told us that Fannie Mae was well capitalized a few months before their collapse. We have to depend on the leadership at the Federal Reserve to tell us the truth. If our monetary system crashes because of bad policy, everything America has worked for, all our material wealth, will be gone, and this country will see a crisis the likes of which it has never seen. This body is not taking this nomination seriously enough. We're moving ahead quickly when what we need to do is have a full audit of the Federal Reserve to look at what has been going on, look at their involvement with the current crisis, and to make sure that they're on the right path. The Constitution gives the Congress the responsibility to protect our monetary system. Years ago, we delegated that to the Federal Reserve, but that does not relieve us of our responsibility. To confirm Ben Bernanke without knowing what's even going on at the Fed, without hearing them say what really caused the problem we have today, is to condemn us to the same path that brought us to where we are. I think voting to confirm Ben Bernanke is a bad decision today. I'd ask all my colleagues to reconsider it. This is probably the biggest mistake we're going to make in a long time, to continue the same policies we've started at the Federal Reserve, our monetary system, as well as what we've done here in Congress. Mr. President, I thank you for the time and again encourage my colleagues to reconsider their commitment to confirm Mr. Bernanke.